Mr. Darwin, and then here, and then here, and then at the back. Yeah.
Now that we have in light of the genome of Neanderthalensis, is there any evidence that we might find DNA for other hominid species? How far back can we push this?
So the question is, we've got the genome for Neanderthalensis. Could we get DNA, lots of DNA, even farther back?
It's a good question. I'm sort of pausing, hesitating to respond here because I mean the way that I've sort of come to understand the preservation. I mean the big issue with ancient DNA is preservation, and the other issue is contamination. And the way that I, until very recently, come to understand things was that there are certain limits in terms of temperature. That the real key thing was having material that was basically in fairly cool environments. Caves in particular seem to be a good source for Neanderthal specimens for which we've got ancient DNA. And that sort of sets, basically there's a sort of limit that's sort of set up in conjunction with the sort of temperature side of things. And about 2 weeks ago, I was talking to an ancient DNA specialist at McMaster over coffee, who informed me that basically they don't really have a very good idea of the conditions that lead to the preservation of ancient DNA. So this notion that's out there in the literature that cool temperature is very important. There's now, people are managing to extract ancient DNA from specimens. He's got a student at the moment working on giant sloths from the Caribbean and extracting ancient DNA from them, from the same sort of tens of thousands of years ago. So at this point, I'm sort of not sure how much further we can go back into other fossil hominids. I mean, that's sort of the fact that the specialists in this area, the 5 or 6 who are working on this area, are so uncertain about the sort of preservational side of things. It sort of certainly opens up the possibility that we might be able to extract it from other hominids. There's a group in Adelaide are trying to get some of the material at the Flores site, the Umbiawa. That site apparently has hair preserved, and so they're looking to see whether some of that hair is from the Hobbit. They haven't had success yet, as far as I can tell, but they're certainly looking for other hominids. At the moment, we've got it for Neanderthals and early anatomically modern humans, and the sort of the upper limit seems to be in the region of about 40,000. We've got ancient DNA from permafrost up in what was Beringia in sort of Alaska, dating back much older. So the potential is that it can be preserved over much longer time periods under certain circumstances, but we don't know at this point the circumstances sufficiently well to be able to predict where we're likely to find it. And of course, the problem that goes along with that is that it's a destructive technique, and people, even though we've got lots of fossil hominins, museum curators are pretty wary about having them ground up with little hope of actually extracting.
So I don't think there's been any ancient DNA, good ancient DNA that's older than on the order of 100 to 200,000 years, right? Total.
Well, the permafrost stuff is about 300,000.
Is it? Okay.
So they managed to extract from the permafrost sequences that date back about 300,000, and this is in the absence of any animal bones. This is just from the soil, and they think it's basically from mammoth poop and pee. So, it's coming out of surprising places, if that's the right way of putting it.
Here.
I was just wondering if there's anything known about differences in species between, in terms of duration of gestation.
So, among the hominins?
Yeah.
Right. Do we know anything about gestation time in these these species?
No, not as far as I'm not sure how we'd access that other than by sort of extrapolation from things like adult brain size. I'm not aware that anybody's actually done any sort of good detailed work on that.
Okay, right at the back there, yeah? We'll have 2 more questions, it's quite late. No, right at the back, yeah. The fellow at the back, right at the back, yeah.
Any evidence that modern humans are continuing to evolve?
Any evidence that modern humans are continuing to evolve?
There's a lot of discussion about that. I was going to make a joke about the last occupant of the White House, but I'll resist. So the sort of general assumption has been that because of culture and sort of buffering that goes along with technology, that we've actually had sort of relaxed selection. But there is some evidence out there that's been recently published for continuing evolution, in fact, more speedy evolution of certain genes that has been, ironically, has been argued probably to be to do with sort of cultural differences arising. So it's an active point of debate. Certainly, much of the variation we see amongst different human populations is probably the result of natural selection in relation to the environment. So skin colour variation, there's now, I think, has been pretty strongly shown to be a consequence of selection in relation to environment and particularly sort of sunlight, the amount of sunlight hitting the earth at different points. So we can think, I think, quite reasonably about our bodies having been shaped and the variation amongst different human populations having been shaped in a fairly short period of time by natural selection in relation to environmental variation. Another really, I think there's a great example of really recent natural selection is lactose tolerance. How many people here are lactose intolerant? Okay, so so most people in this room are lactose tolerant. You're weird. Okay, most of the world, the human population of the world, are lactose intolerant. Okay, and there's an interesting story that's been worked out over the last 10, 15 years. It's showing, I think, quite plausibly that lactose tolerance is actually a form of co-evolution with dairying. Okay, so with the adoption of particularly domesticated cattle, okay, and other animals that produce milk. And so we get this sort of co-evolutionary phenomenon that is only a few thousand years old. Okay, so if you look at the distribution of lactose digestion capability, it's got a very odd distribution on a worldwide map. It basically is in northern Europe, sort of filters out in the southern part of the Mediterranean. Then it's found in a few places in Africa. And the sort of key linkage there seems to be a fairly recent history with the adoption and use of cattle, and particularly of milk products from cattle. So there's an interesting, say, sort of co-evolutionary story there, which to my mind is probably the best evidence we've got at the moment for ongoing natural selection. And so it's something that should be familiar to many people in this room.
So we should make a distinction between evolution and evolution by natural selection. Humans are evolving, because evolving is just changing gene frequencies. So gene frequencies are changing all the time. So humans are definitely evolving, but usually people are asking whether we're adapting to new environments. Which is what Mark was talking about.